Search Panama Canal Cruise and you'll find 3 completely different vacations being sold under the same name. One takes a ship all the way from one ocean to the other. One enters the canal, goes into Gatun Lake, turns around and goes right back out the way it came. And one stops in Panama without putting the ship through a lock at all. Cruise line listings don't always make those differences obvious. And that's how people unfortunately sometimes book a partial transit while they wanted a full crossing, or they just book a port of call in Colón and spend a week on their cruise waiting for a canal crossing that was never part of the itinerary. I sailed a partial transit on Holland America's Rotterdam, and I definitely would book that version again. It gave me the lock experience, a full day inside the canal, and a round trip itinerary from Florida, so I didn't have to fly into one city and back home from another. But it also came with a restriction nobody explained until I was on board. Had I booked Colón the way I normally book a port, I could have lost the entire day, and I'm glad I didn't, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. Now, I'll mention that potential mistake I almost made because it only makes sense once you first understand which Panama Canal cruise you're actually buying. We're talking about 3 cruises, 1 name. A full transit takes the ship all the way across the isthmus, ocean to ocean. You're going to pass through locks on both ends, you're going to cross Gatun Lake, and you're going to continue through the narrow cuts in the middle. This is the version that most people picture when they say they want to cruise the Panama Canal, but it's also the version that usually requires the most planning. Full transits often begin and end in different regions, and that means 2 different airports, a longer sailing, and usually a larger travel budget before you've even booked a single excursion. And Panama excursions are not usually cheap. When crossing from one ocean to the other is the reason for your trip, though, that extra planning is just part of the experience and you just have to do it. A partial transit approaches from the Caribbean side. It passes through one set of locks, enters Gatun Lake, spends much of the day inside the canal, and then returns toward the Atlantic. Many of these sailings operate round trip from Florida, so you can come in and out of the same airport. And that's what I did on my Panama Canal cruise. We were on a Holland America ship and we cruised out of Port Everglades. So it was nice to depart and return to the same port. Now, my ship was Rotterdam, and we entered through the expanded locks. We rose inside the chamber where they raised that water, and then we crossed over into Gatun Lake, and then we kind of sailed around the lake, and then we turned back later that afternoon. I got to watch the gates close around us. I got to see the ship lift up with the water. It was a really cool experience. I still got the physical experience most people imagine when they picture a canal cruise, but I got the benefit of flying in and out of the same home port city. So that was a nice practical trade-off. It also tends to be a shorter itinerary. So for me, having work and family obligations, my kids had no interest in going to the Panama Canal, so I had to arrange for childcare, so I couldn't be gone a really long time. That partial transit was perfect for my needs. Now, a third option is just a Panama port call. Your ship stops in Colón or another Panamanian port, and you leave the ship to do an excursion to go see the canal from a distance. You might visit an observation center, you might take a smaller boat through part of the waterway, you might tour the forts, or you can combine several of those experiences. But in these cases, your ship may never actually enter a lock. That can still be an excellent port day. It can be an excellent experience. You're still learning all about the canals, but you're not actually transiting the canal. And sometimes, unfortunately, your itinerary title might not make that distinction clear enough. So it's really important that if you care about transiting the canal, that you're really checking your itinerary and you're really reading and making sure that you're booking the thing that you think you're booking. Things that you can do are reading the day-by-day schedule and looking for specific language. If you want the full transit, you want to look for full transit or ocean to ocean. If you're okay with the partial transit, which is what I did, which was absolutely more than what I needed, it was totally fine and wonderful, you're going to look for partial transit or Gatun Lake transit or canal cruising. And if it's a port day in Colón that just promises a stop in Colón, you're usually not going to see anything about ocean to ocean or transit at all. It's simply a regular old cruise that happens to call in Colón. And you get to learn about the Panama Canal, but you're not actually transiting. So book the full transit when crossing between the 2 oceans is the central reason why you're going. Some people really want that full experience. But again, like me, if you want a more affordable option or shorter option, with a shorter itinerary, book the partial transit. You still get to experience the locks in Gatun Lake without having to do flying into one city, flying home from another city, and taking all the time that a full transit usually requires. And go the cheapest route, which is booking just a port of call in Colón when you're totally satisfied just seeing the canal from land or from a smaller excursion boat. Once you've decided on the type of transit that you're interested in, the next question you have to think about is which lock system your ship will use, and do you care which one it is? For me, I didn't care at all, but some people do care, so it's important to know the difference. The original and expanded lock systems operate alongside each other, but they can be different experiences. And which experience you get is largely determined by the ship. The original or old locks, that uses the Gatun locks on the Atlantic side, followed by the Pedro Miguel and the Miraflores on the Pacific side. These chambers were opened in the canal in 1914, and they were built for narrower vessels. The expanded route opened in 2016 for larger ships and uses Agua Clara on the Atlantic side and Cocoli on the Pacific side. The deciding factor, though, isn't the number of passengers on board. So you can't just say, okay, well, I'm on a cruise that has very few passengers, so we're going to use a certain set of locks. You don't always know that. The determining factor is usually its width. A ship carrying fewer guests can still be too wide for those original narrower chambers. Older and narrower ships are more likely to fit the historic locks, but the itinerary or cruise line is what should be confirming the route. So if you really care about which set of locks that you're going to transit, make sure you confirm that with the cruise line. Now, the experiences, they are different. In the original locks, the chamber walls sit really close to the ship and the electric locomotives move along the rails beside it as the vessel passes through. So you get to watch the original engineering system operate around you, and for some people that love the history and the engineering part, that might be really important to you. The expanded locks give a wider view of the more modern system that's designed for much larger vessels. The gates and operating system, they work differently, and the scale itself becomes a spectacle. Watching a cruise ship fit into either set of locks, though, is really impressive. So I think both options are great, but if you care about that, you want to check which locks you're going to transit through. Now, I chose the ship and itinerary first and accepted the expanded locks that came with them. And for me, it wasn't really important, so I don't regret that decision at all. And I actually did an excursion, which I'll tell you about in a moment, that allowed me to actually see both locks, so I really got to experience both. But again, if you really care about transiting the old historic locks, you want to look for terms in your booking that say things like historic locks, original locks, Panamax, expanded locks, or Neo-Panamax. When the description is vague, then you want to press the cruise line or your travel agent. And by the way, if you need a travel agent, I know some really great ones. I'll be happy to connect you. I'll drop the link below, and it costs you nothing for their expert help. But regardless of which system that you choose, the most important planning decision comes after you board. And that is to ensure that you give the canal your entire day. Now, for people who love to plan, this is a little tough because you can't always schedule precisely around canal day. The ship will probably publish estimated transit times the night before, and they'll share those with passengers, but you have to treat them as estimates because there are a lot of factors like canal traffic, pilots, maintenance, weather, the type of movement of other vessels that can all change the sequence because they are a one-way set of locks and you got a bunch of ships that are waiting to enter them. So the night before, your ship's captain will be given an estimated time. They'll pass that along to passengers, but it's definitely not a guarantee. And in my experience on Holland America Line's Rotterdam, our times did shift. We were told a little bit of a later entry, but the announcement that we were approaching the first lock actually came before 7 a.m. So it was really early. So always set your alarm earlier than the published estimate because cabin announcements, usually that early, they make them on a very low volume and it might not be loud enough to wake you up. And missing the beginning of that transit because you trusted a tentative time can be an awful way to start the day that you booked the whole cruise for in the first place. Now, I love all cruise staterooms. I don't even mind interior staterooms, but with the Panama Canal, friends, this is one where you just gotta splurge for the balcony. Even a partial view balcony is a great experience on a Panama Canal cruise. Why? Because a balcony is the comfortable place to watch that transit. You can get your coffee, you can go out on your balcony, you can go out in your pajamas. That's what I did because it was very early. And it was really, really nice to have it there at my disposal. Also, Holland America Line did a really great job of keeping the cameras on so I could see the front and the back of the ship and see what it looked like on those ends of the transit. And they had an expert there narrating, which I really loved. So I would go out, kind of watch, come in, listen to the narration, learn the history and the engineering of it, and then go back out. Every part of the ship is going to show you a different angle or a different aspect of that crossing. From the bow, you can watch the ship line up with the chamber that looks way too small to hold it. So it's kind of this, again, engineering modern marvel that you're getting to see firsthand. So seeing it from the bow, from the front of the ship is really exciting. From an upper deck, you get to see the large scale of the locks and the waterway around them. I had a midship room, so from the side, it was really cool because you're really close. You get to see the walls, you get to see the employees kind of doing their work, the gates, the rails, the machinery. From the stern, you can watch the gates close behind the ship and you can see the water very gradually change inside the chamber. So I encourage you to move around, even when you do have a balcony, because the day becomes much more interesting when you get to see the same transit from several different angles and perspectives. Also find the onboard narrator generation. As I mentioned, Holland America Line did a really great job. This is what I love about Holland. I love this cruise line. I know it's the old people's cruise line, but I'm a nerd. I love to learn. I love culture. And I think no cruise line does it better than Holland America Line. So Holland and a lot of cruise lines will bring a canal expert on board the ship during the transit. And that commentary is going to give you context into what you're watching. Now, without it, a transit can look like several hours of concrete, glass, and water. It can feel pretty boring. With it, you understand why the ship is rising, how it works, the history of it, how the chambers fill, what the locomotives do, and how the original and expanded systems solve the same problem, but in different ways. So transiting the canal, it is not anything that happens quickly. It's not anything that's particularly exciting, but if you love history and you love engineering and you love things like this, you're going to be transfixed by it. I do encourage you to keep the rest of your schedule loose on transit day. A spa appointment, a long specialty lunch, or an activity deep inside the ship, that can pull you away during the most interesting parts, and you don't always know when those interesting parts are going to happen. And again, the timing of those things are not always exactly set in stone. So I recommend giving the canal your full day and save the massage for a sea day. That flexibility becomes even more important on a partial transit, which is what I did, because entering Gatun Lake can also change how you're allowed to leave the ship. Now I want to talk about the restriction that I didn't see coming. On my sailing, passengers booked on eligible cruise line excursions, they left the Rotterdam by tender in Gatun Lake, and then they rejoined the ship later near Colón. So it was a really efficient system, but it was also the only system available for getting off the ship during that part of the day. So if you follow my content, you know I'm not a big fan of cruise line excursions. I almost always recommend going independent, but in this case, you have no choice. Independent passengers just simply could not step ashore in Gatun Lake and meet up with their own private driver or take a taxi or do whatever. There was no regular pier, so you can't just get off the ship and arrange your own day. So in this case, the restriction was I had to book a cruise line excursion. We kind of did it by the seat of our pants. We weren't really planning on doing it, and I did find this all fascinating, but after several hours of this very slow transit, my friends and I, we got a little bored and we're like, let's go out. We want to get on land. We couldn't just, again, get off at a pier. So last minute, thankfully, we were able to actually book a cruise line excursion through Holland America Line, which took us via tender boat over to shore. So it's really important that you consider this. We got lucky. I would have felt very bored several hours later, but not everyone could always be so lucky. So it's really important, I think, that when you book a Panama Canal cruise, that you look at that itinerary, you look at your transit day, and you determine whether or not you think you want to do an excursion, and it's best to book that in advance because we could have been very unfortunate. They could have all been booked, and we would have probably felt a little stuck on the cruise ship that day. So for me now, Colón is one of the few ports where I always book a cruise line excursion because I have to. And if I ever do it again, I know to book it in advance. I got very lucky. Now, in terms of excursions, a strong contender for a really good excursion is going to combine the Agua Clara Visitor Center, which is where we went, with Fort San Lorenzo. Agua Clara sits above the expanded Atlantic locks, giving you that kind of bird's eye view down into the chambers as the ships pass through. So it's really cool to experience that transit in the morning, have your ship get through the locks, be in Gatun Lake, then tender over to land, and then get to go to the visitor center and see it from above. That angle is going to show you the system in a way that you're not going to see from the ship. Fort San Lorenzo overlooks a river and it connects the canal area to the Spanish trade routes. So it's really cool to see these examples of 17th and 18th century military architecture. My excursion that we booked spontaneously and got lucky with included Agua Clara and the original Gatun locks. So again, that morning I got to see it firsthand. Later I got to look down on those same locks, and I also got to go over and see the original system. And it was neat to get to see the new system and the old system and see the differences and compare. And it gave me a much clearer understanding of how the entire operation fits together. Now, if you do plan to book an excursion and get out and about in Panama, which I strongly recommend that you do, here's one quick practical note for Panama. US bills circulate alongside the Balboa, which is valued 1-to-1 with the dollar. So carry small bills and expect that some of your change may come back in Panamanian coins. And again, Colón is a very different port of call if you're doing a transit like I did. We took the tender boat off the ship, took us to land, we got to see the old and the new locks, we got to learn about it, and we got to see the old US military fort, and the excursion ended by depositing us at the cruise terminal. And this cruise terminal is unique because it has kind of an indoor-outdoor mall, which is called Colón 2000. And I did a little bit of advanced planning. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if it was going to be like an Americanized mall. It's really not. There are some American stores like Victoria's Secret, but there's a lot of small locally owned shops that are basically selling knockoffs, like knockoff Labubus and things like that. But it is a really cool two-story indoor-outdoor mall where you can have a nice bite to eat. We ended up getting some food and we got to watch the ships come in and out. And it was really, really cool. And it was neat to get to walk back on the ship ship, whereas we exited it via tender boat. And when it comes to planning, while the Panama Canal is usually the shining star for why people obviously book Panama Canal cruises, you also have to think ahead and plan for the other ports of call. Now, Panama Canal cruises can have varying ports of call. In our case, we visited some South America countries, but we also visited Half Moon Cay and Jamaica, which might be a little bit unexpected because we started on the Caribbean side. So your ports of call may vary, but a lot of common ports of call on Panama Canal cruises include the same stops. One of them is Cartagena, Colombia, and Cartagena does require its own planning. It might be the most visually beautiful and interesting and historical stop on the itinerary, but it's also one of the easiest to accidentally waste if you treat it like a place where you simply walk off the ship and figure things out. Now, I loved Cartagena. The historic city, it's filled with plazas, churches, flower-covered balconies, narrow streets, walls, and batteries. It's a UNESCO heritage site, and UNESCO describes Cartagena fortifications as the most extensive in South America. For a first visit, I recommend folks prioritize the walled city and the Castillo San Felipe de Barajas, and use a guide who can explain what you are seeing. We did a cruise line excursion. Again, I normally don't do them, but the Panama Canal cruise is a little bit of a different animal completely, and I'm glad that we did, because also the walled city and the things that you really do want to see in Cartagena are not necessarily close to the cruise terminal, so booking an excursion is just a really nice way to get around. We kind of did a middle ground of cruise line excursion, but also going independent, and we did a Cartagena on your own. So we had a bus with a guide that took us there, dropped us off in the walled city. We got to experience that for a few hours on our own, which I love, then crave that freedom and that independence, and they bus us back to the cruise terminal. Now, the walled city is the Cartagena that most travelers picture when they hear of the city. Castillo San Felipe sits outside those walls, and with us on a bus, we actually stopped there first and then headed on the rest of the way to the walled city. For us, stopping at Castillo San Felipe was a really quick kind of photo op. We didn't actually have time to go in, which was actually okay with me. But if you love military history, you want to see the ramps, the tunnels, the firing positions, and all of that stuff, you probably want to book a separate excursion instead of trying to combine the two together. The cruise terminal itself is separated from the historic center by busy roads and port infrastructure, and that part's not necessarily pretty. It's also not necessarily going to feel the most safe. So I recommend booking, again, a cruise line excursion, even for folks that normally like to wander around on their own. And this is definitely not something you want to try to walk. Visit the fortress early. Cartagena can become brutally hot and humid, and the exposed stone is really difficult by midday. Always bring water, hydrate, wear a hat, and make the fortress your morning stop, which again, we got lucky on our tour. We stopped there first, got to see it, learn a little bit about it, take our photos. We got back on the bus, and the walled city was the main destination for us. And a word of caution with the walled city in Cartagena. I absolutely loved it. I'm normally very patient with pushy vendors, but in Cartagena at the walled city, there were some of the most aggressive pushy vendors that I've ever experienced, which is saying a lot, to the point where it almost did start to bother me. And usually I'm pretty unruffled by vendors, so prepare for that. I always recommend folks make sure they return to the ship plenty of time before the return to ship time officially hits. But in this case, you definitely don't want to rush, and you definitely don't want to wait till the last minute, because this is a really cool cruise terminal. Port Oasis is basically this garden and animal area right there at the terminal. They have flamingos, parrots, peacocks, toucans, and monkeys. So I recommend leaving about 30 minutes on the tail end of your day in Cartagena to make sure you have a chance to experience that, because if you push it to the last minute, you're basically going to get off the bus or your taxi or with your driver or whatever and be sprinting to the gangway, and you're going to rush through and miss all of this. And it's really, really cool. Now, another thing that Cartagena is known for is the emerald trade. You will find emerald shops everywhere, and they can be pretty aggressive with the sales pitch. I'm normally not a souvenir shopper, and yeah, I ended up buying an overpriced pair of emerald earrings. I do have moderate regrets. Colombia's reputation for emeralds, it's legit, but that does not make every tourist purchase a good investment. So if you want to buy something emerald, some emerald jewelry, use a reputable seller, ask for documentation, kind of study it a little bit in advance, because for me, I felt the pressure of, I have a ticking clock, I have to get back on the bus. Do I want these earrings or not? And I otherwise probably wouldn't have bought them. So just be prepared for that and plan a little bit ahead and look into it and kind of know a little bit about pricing before you get those high pressure sales tactics. And also you got to be careful, because in my case, I don't want to spend half of a short port of call in a great city like Cartagena spent haggling with people over some earrings in a jewelry shop. Now let's talk about Puerto Limón in Costa Rica. This is the port where flexibility gave me the most value. Now, Costa Rica is special to me because it's the first non-North American country that I ever visited. It was the reason that I got my passport, and shockingly, it was in my 30s. I never traveled outside the United States or Mexico, and that first trip to Costa Rica really changed me. It really changed how I think about travel, and I really embraced that Pura Vida thing, which is the big saying in Costa Rica about embracing life and letting go, because I am a lot type A. So traveling to Costa Rica really changed me, and I have never been back until my visit to Limón. So returning years later by cruise ship, this time on the Caribbean side, it felt like coming back to the place that for me kind of started it all. So So it was really special to me. And I also just love Costa Rica. Puerto Limón itself, it is a working port. So it's not going to be the prettiest. It's basically a parking lot with some vendors and a lot of buses and cars and drivers waiting for tourists. The rainforest, the canals, the lush wildlife, all that stuff is away from the terminal. So the quality of your day depends heavily on how you choose to get beyond the port and who is guiding you. And like Cartagena, this is not a port destination where you want to expect just to get off and walk around. Now, in my case, I did what I love to do, which is hire a private driver. I found an amazing one. The value is outstanding. We paid less to book Danny for the day than we would have paid for a cruise line excursion, being on a bus with several other people, up to 40 or 50 people. So Danny works with cruise passengers in Costa Rica. He serves both Limón and the other Costa Rican cruise terminal location. And once the cost again was divided by our group, our per person price came in again cheaper than those cruise line excursions. And if you have larger groups, you're really gonna pay less. Now, what really made this cool and special is I love sloths. I've done the sloth holding experience in Roatan and other destinations, but there's nothing like seeing a sloth in the wild. And we were not even 10 minutes out of the terminal area with Danny in his car, and he pulled over and said, "I see sloths." And I look over and I'm like, "What? I don't see anything." But Danny, he came prepared. I'm telling you, he is the tour guide. He had a tripod with binoculars, pulled over safely to the side of the road and showed us a two-toed sloth and a three-toed sloth, two different species sitting right next to each other hanging from the trees. And that stop was not listed on any itinerary. He just, being a local, born and raised, he saw them, stopped, knew we wanted to see sloths, and let us experience that. And I'm getting chills talking about it because it was just that cool. Now, of course, it's never a guarantee, but this region is filled with sloths, so I'd say there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna see it. Had we been on a motor coach with a cruise line excursion carrying 50 people, the bus probably would have stopped and said, "Look at those sloths over there," and maybe we could have seen it through the tinted windows, maybe not. I highly doubt they would have let everybody get off the bus to try to look, and I certainly guarantee that they wouldn't have had binoculars on a tripod ready. So this is one of those cases where having a private driver not only was cheaper, but it gave us a much, much better, more magical, amazing experience. He also stopped by a local fruit stand and we got to sample some local fruit, which was really cool as well. And then Danny took us to an experience where we got to take a small boat through the Tortuguero canals, and we got to see in the wild monkeys, caimans, iguanas, more sloths, and more birds than I could even count. Now, again, wildlife never is going to be guaranteed, but a small boat and a local guide is going to give you a much better chance of seeing what is moving along the bank. Now, packing for Costa Rica, make sure you pack a light rain shell even when the morning looks clear. Carry small bills. Always ask what currency a vendor prefers and expect that change might come back in colones. When buying coffee, compare prices outside of the tourist shop. Of course, you got to go to Costa Rica. You got to try the coffee. You're probably going to bring some home. And in our case, it was really cool because we asked Danny to take us to a regular Costa Rican grocery store. That's my little cruise hack, because the price differences can be significant. We got to buy Costa Rican coffee at significantly lower cost than we did at the tourist shops. And Costa Rica is a seasonal port, but Danny does book up fast. So if you are planning a cruise to a Costa Rican port, I recommend booking him in advance. I'll drop his information down below. I can't say enough great things about him. He's absolutely amazing. And before doing the grocery store, I also wanted to see Limón Beach. So Danny took us to a beach. We had a nice local lunch. We got to see the beach. Unfortunately, the weather was not great that day. But the cool thing about having a driver is you get to do what you want, when you want, how you want, and Danny will take you wherever you want to go, within reason. So a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. That's the world's longest palindrome. Did you know that, my friends? Definitely worth it. Definitely a bucket list for me. But if you're expecting high energy, lots of adrenaline, and you get bored easily, Panama Canal might not be for you. So let me know, is Panama Canal on your bucket list? Have you been? What did you think? Drop your comments below and let's talk ship.